Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode titled Inflation. Contrary to the title, this is not an episode focused around the impact that the hero industry or the current international crisis in the story is having upon the economy. Those of you who have seen my reviews for Vigilantes will know that I'd be perfectly fine with an episode which is just this big, dry, emotionless, business-centered or civic or legislative planning-focused episode. This just boring meeting that just goes through the minutiae and finer details about hero work in the most emotionless, bland and uninteresting way possible. I don't know why I'm wired like that, I just am. But with that said, let us talk about this episode, and we start off this review as we always do by talking about the positives. Well, the action this week is well and truly underway with some compelling moments of drama and some great visuals thrown in here and there. I suppose we should start off this review by addressing the elephant in the room, or I should say the fingers in the room. Now, I know there has been some speculation in the comments last week that I'd have a problem with the CGI fingers, and I have to say that they are perfectly fine for what they are. I think that at the end of the day they are well integrated into the animation, unlike the CGI skeleton from earlier in this season and the CGI pipes from a few seasons back. There are a couple of shots where it didn't look too good, but I feel that at this point it's more of a frame rate issue than necessarily how well it's integrated into the animation itself, because they look 2D enough. They get the right colour temperature right, they get the right visual look to it. Just the frame rate in a couple of shots just looks a little bit too off for it to feel quite as natural as the rest of the hand-drawn animation. Of course, that's not why we're here today. We're not here to talk about the animation of a bunch of freaky fingers. We're here to talk about who's summoning those freaky fingers. The big reveal in this story is to discuss theory that in this opening scene, Tomura has overcome the Quirk Doomsday. I still call bullshit on that. A, because as I've said in the past, I don't like the whole Quirk Doomsday thing, and B, this just seems to ultimately boil down to a way around Eraserhead's quirk. Tomura explains that his power that he's using right now is purely physical, that it's a part of him in the way in which your hair and fingernails are, and as such it can grow just like them. This is a natural process rather than a superpower in the traditional sense of the word, or at least in the traditional sense within this world. It is a mutation. We have never really seen Eraserhead's quirk work on someone with a mutation quirk. And hypothetically speaking, it wouldn't really work that well on them. It's not going to stop them being who they are. If someone's mutation quirk makes them into a washing machine, they're not going to stop being a washing machine. If their mutation quirk gives them the head of a bull mastiff, they're not all of a sudden turn into a normal guy. They just maybe don't use whatever other superpower that might be connected to that is. Like if they can shoot laser beams out their eyes or something, they still retain that physical edge to it. And it just so happens that in this instance, Tomura's freaky finger power, or hand power as it is referred to in the subtitles, is something that can be activated like a traditional quirk, or at least just flexed into being, I suppose. I suppose part of my issue with this is more the fact that up until relatively recently, this series has had a fairly grounded and measured definition of what quirks are and the quote-unquote science behind them. There is a through line of logic, even if some of the science behind it might be bullshit. It's understandable. It's something you can put a line in, you can put a knife in, you can say, this is how this definitively works, this is the limitations and the areas that it can control, these are the areas that it falls short in. And it's only now that we get into the final storyline that we're going full tilt into anime bullshit territory, which kind of upends that kind of science behind it. But understandably so, because again, we are in the final storyline, even it might take another season or so to complete. As such, we need to raise the stakes higher than ever before by having a villain who can activate his quirk in a way that doesn't activate a quirk, which is an interesting series of events. So we'll see where I end up going with all of this. I think that beyond this, the scene itself is fine. I think that it does fall short a little bit for me for creating this greater sense of sinister, impending dread that I think that scene and the episode as a whole needed. It is still there, particularly as we get into the latter half of the episode, but particularly in this scene with Tomura, I don't think it really reaches the kind of levels that it needs to, like the fact that he's using a quirk despite having a quirk erasing power being used on him should be this big shock moment. The fact that he is, as he's saying, overcoming the quirk doomsday theory thing should be a thing that's having us go, oh no! And maybe for some corners of the internet, maybe for some other broadcasters, reaction videos and reviewers, it is a oh god, what's happening moment. But I think the scene itself doesn't quite go that far to really make it into that big shock moment. Maybe he needed to knock people about a little bit more. Maybe they need to be a bit more of a sense of destruction. But all we have right now is him looking sinister with a bunch of fingers coming out of his back or wherever. Like, perfectly fine within itself, but I think that maybe part of the issue is the fact we are jumping about quite so much with this episode. We're just going from this fight sequence to this fight sequence to this fight sequence, and it doesn't quite go where it necessarily needs to with me. There is, of course, the shock revelation coming to the group itself that Midoriya has been split off from that main group, and the fact that they can't just teleport him over because of Phantom Thief having the limitation on his quirk borrowing ability. And in fact, come to think about it, how would he even use the warp quirk without Kurogiri or whatever his name is being nearby? Anyway, it doesn't matter, that's for something for them all to figure out. This, of course, all pivots into the big fight on that island with Toga, with her being drawn in some very visually unpleasant and sinister ways. Just some really nasty, creepy, brilliantly nasty facial expressions from her, almost all the way through the sequence, and I do like that it helps create this, reminding us that she's less of a human being at this point and more like some kind of twisted monster, which itself just adds to this greater sense of uneasiness when she ends up revealing her twisted love for Midoriya. It's twisted as she loves him so much that she wants to fucking murder him and drink his blood! You know, it's kind of a shame that Midoriya gets tapped out of this fight so early, because it would have been interesting to see how we would cope with fighting a villain who is just nuts. Like, not someone who's just this big, tough, bad guy that thinks they're going to win, or fighting some kind of guy who they can be redeemed, or someone who has some kind of tragic backstory, but someone who is just out and out screwy. Like, that would be an interesting thing to see how we'd end up coping with that, and that's not really what we get here. He gets tapped out fairly early because ultimately this is about Ochako taking her down, and then this all becoming this great big lopsided love triangle battle thing. I mean, it might get interesting. We've only seen a slice of it thus far, no pun intended, and the true direction of where all this is going is probably not going to be realised for, well, could be many months at this point, let's be honest. Like, with the big final storyline, and it might take another season or so to conclude, so we're probably not going to get much of a resolution to this particular fight sequence for quite some time, but we'll end up seeing where it ends up going. The explanation as to how Midoriya's danger sense quirk didn't work is interesting, I think. I will admit I don't fully understand it. It might be a thing that's lost in translation, it might be just a thing that's lost in the subtitles for me, given the dyslexia thing, but are they saying that the reason why it didn't trigger is because Toga loves him, and as such the quirk didn't sense her as being a threat, so that's why she was able to get the jump on him? Or is it just that she has something about her that isn't making it trigger? Like, she has something in her blood or what have you that's not making it trigger? I don't know. We don't really... Well, we do get it explained to us, but it just didn't register me for whatever reason. So, by all means, comment down below. Tell me exactly what's going on with that. But, you know, almost as soon as Midoriya lands in this whole sequence, he disappears again. Understandably so, as ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to develop a mechanism with which to get him into that big final fight, even though I get this feeling he might be waylaid along the way there. But either way, I mean, it's fine, it's good. I think the whole sequence of events is good for what it is. Just the sheer shock and terror of getting Midoriya realising just what a twisted person she really is, and I like the scene. I just wish I had more from it, I think, is the big thing for me. Just before we end up turning this into just a whole annotated recap, let's just briefly touch upon the pre-title stuff, the recap that we get towards the start of the episode before the title sequence kicked in, and I thought that itself was fine. Fine enough for what it is. I personally would rather that we didn't have it, given how recent all these series of events are, given how recent all the scenes of planning all of this is, but it's decent enough for what it is. It's a fine recap for anyone who's tuning in late or may have missed something. It's decent enough for what it is. It tells us everything that we need to do in that particular short period of time. It's short, thankfully. It doesn't overstay its welcome. There was a part of me that was worried at the very start of this episode that we would literally just have just a extended recap of all the planning stuff before we then got into the fight sequences, which thankfully we don't end up getting here. But I do have this nasty feeling we're going to see this planning scene another 2 or 3 times by the time this storyline is done. To discuss broader points of praise, I have to say is that the humour within this episode was perfectly fine for what it was. There wasn't much, but I think at the end of the day, it was executed decently well enough. The Miriko, Bakugo arguing bit was a fun little exchange for the whole of 2 lines. I think at the end of the day, short as though it is, it does keep within the range and tone of the scene that it's in without being too disarming. As you'll have known from my previous reviews of this season thus far, I think that many of the joke sequences in the episodes themselves have felt rather out of place. They feel as though they're going against the tone of the scenes which they are in a way which didn't feel jarring, but it felt close to being jarring. You'd have scenes in the previous episodes where someone giving a big important speech, but then someone would have a weird facial expression or messed up hair or something like that, and it felt as though it took something away from those scenes. Not to the point that it disarmed them or made them bad, but still something I don't think should have really been there. And the short little humour sequences we get in this episode are perfectly fine for what they are. Midoriya getting flustered by Toga admitting that she loves him was fun, even though I'm not entirely sure as though that was supposed to be a joke moment or not. It feels as though Midoriya, particularly when bearing in mind the performance of the voice actor, it's not really played for laughs, but it's animated in such a way that it makes it feel as though it's played for laughs. His response to it is just this sense of just this confused, befuddled, enraged state. He doesn't know how to react to it. He's not entertained by her statement. He's kind of enraged, but at the same time just driven mad by what she's saying, that he doesn't really know how to react to it. But the way that it's animated is a way in which it makes it look like it's... I don't even know how to best describe that. I don't know. I think that's just something that was lost in the animation. I think that in the manga it probably would have read a little bit differently. Still, if we're going to talk about probably the big thing that a lot of people are going to be talking about, it is the latter portion of the episode where we set up for the big confrontation between Shoto and Dabi, the one that many people have been looking forward to, and the one that a lot of people are very excited for. I will admit, I thought when I was writing this I'd have more to say about it, but at the end of the day I don't, because this is just setting up for next week. Like, the visuals within this scene are good. The fire surrounding everybody is good. Dabi on the statue of All Might is a neat visual image. It's showing how he's toying with the status quo. All Might is regarded as the symbol of peace in Japan, and there he is just toying with All Might as though he is a piece of playground equipment. He's not yet destroying it because he has his own personal things that he needs to do in the meantime. It's just there, and he's just showing just how little he cares for it. This statue of Japan's greatest hero, and he's treating it like it's just a slide at a park. Or climbing frame, I think, would be a better description of it. He cares so little about it. And I think that makes for an interesting visual image. Of course, the really cool visual image, if it's rather grody and nasty, is the thing about Dabi's flesh now really burning away before our eyes. You got that moment where we just see these studs in his face that are keeping his mouth together, just pinging off one by one, and it just becomes this rather nasty burnt mass of muscle. It's nasty and twisted and freaky looking, but it makes him look more like this strange undead demon thing, and I think that that's a great visual image, and I want to just see how nasty all this gets by the time this big fight between them ends up ending. It shows just how consumed that he is by his own need for revenge, that he doesn't care what becomes of him or what happens to him so long as he wins in the end. It's the idea of, if he's willing to do this to himself, oh god, what is he willing to do to you? And that creates a fantastic visual image for it, and it creates this brilliant contrast between Shoto and Dabi, as though anyone was ever needed. Dabi is well on his way to just saying, I'm going to end this my way regardless of the damage of it, yet Shoto still wants to pretend and create this sense of, I can still do this in a measured way, which I don't think he's going to be able to do so. But of course, the big downside to that scene is the fact that it's setting up for things next week, which maybe that will be the focus. I hope that the focus of next week's episode is going to be this confrontation between the two of them. I understand it's not going to be the big final confrontation, but at least give us scene one, effectively, of this, even if it's not going to be literally first scene or act one of this big confrontation between them. With all that said, let's get into the negatives, and I have to say that my big issue with this week's episode is that I feel that there was a little bit too much going on. We were almost constantly bouncing from one group to the other just at the moment where things were starting to get interesting. It feels like the majority of this episode is just setting the stage for things to come later on, which in and of itself is fine. Given a story of the scale of this nature, you need to end up setting these things up. You need to give us an idea of the lay of the land and the emotional states within these episodes and what's happening on where they're within them. However, I hope that this is not the shape of things to come in the future. Given the direction of things for the next episode as per the preview, it looks like it won't be, and that next week we'll have a bit more of a focus down on Dabi and Shoto, which I hope is the case. But I still have this nasty feeling in the back of my mind that this is going to be the case of things to come, that outside of these random episodes here and there, which are a little bit more of a deep dive, a lot of the episodes are going to ultimately be split between two groups or more as we just flick between them to see what's happening within them. And I don't particularly like that. Sure, this is all early stages. This is the final story arc which will make up the rest of this season and most likely will be the entirety of the next season, so I understand that they need to parcel things out like this. They need to set the stage of these events so that we have stuff coming down the pipeline. None of these fights are going to be a one episode and done thing. But still, I feel that focusing around one group at a time would be better. Again, you don't need to have the big final confrontation with them. You don't need to see them winning or losing. We just need to drill down into the dynamics of these fights, because there's a lot more happening here than just the anime punchy, shouty action stuff. That's something I like about this series, but even though it does feel as though it's starting to lean more into the anime punchy, shouty stuff more recently, but still, there's a lot of interesting fight sequences being set up here. A lot of the emotional stakes are really interesting. I just hope that we drill down into them more going forward. With that said, let's get into the overview. And I have to say, this episode was perfectly fine in and of itself. There is some interesting moments of drama there, and even though I don't feel as though were really built up to the level that they needed to, this episode does feel like a lot of connecting tissue and setting the stage for things to come up later. Though it does feel as though for the previous few weeks or so, a lot of this has been setting the stage for things to come and just waiting for us to actually get to where we're getting here. Yes, I know that the big final confrontation is not going to be coming for another season or so, but even still, we still need these moments of some sense of resolution in the meantime. We need to get to these points where, I don't know, a hero and a villain are fighting, and maybe it looks like the villain's going to win. End of episode. Then we come back to them in a couple of weeks' time and resume that fight, and then we go from there. You know, something like that, which is probably a way that this is all going to be washing out, but we'll soon see about that. With all that said and done, let us get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. It's getting unpleasantly humid because British summertime's weird. Ding dong! Okay, time for Comment Corner. It's time to talk about Big X1's comments. This is, of course, referring to last week's episode where they say that I really like this episode, but I wanted more. I like seeing the planning, but it could have been its own episode. Maybe. Thank you for your comment, and yeah, I could have seen it being done as its own episode, but like I said in my previous review, there is a part of me that worries that that might have set up for expectations of failure, because we all know how the expected direction with these things go. Either a plan that's discussed in a piece of fiction or a piece of media goes off utterly flawlessly, and if there's any issues then it's considered a cinema sin, or alternatively all plans are meant to end in failure of mice and men and all that kind of malarkey. So, you know, just folding into the episode itself at least deals without those expectations being crushed or met or what have you, but, you know, it is what it is. I could see the planning stuff being done, but hey, whatever. Our next comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, not much for me to comment on in regards to the episode itself, other than I thought it was great overall, but I'd like to clarify a few things. One, pretty sure Shigaraki's arena is the actual UA building, if I remember correctly. Wow, I'm interested to see how they explain that. And two, under the effects of erasure, Tomura is actually quirkless. Right now, in the last war, he couldn't use his quirk. Last time, he fought so well due to being so physically strong from the Doctor's enhancements. Here, the finger stuff is meant to be a surprise since he's quirkless now. We should get an explanation next week, which we did, which ties into what I said about the quirk doomsday theory, which again, I wasn't 100% right about, but hopefully you'll see. And then a bonus bit from then, and also as a bonus, but I assume you don't watch the previews, right? If so, if that's the case, then what I'm about to say is a minor spoiler, but I recommend you read it. In the next episode, probably future ones, Shigaraki's finger mask is going to be CGI. Most have expected this going off the trailers, but and the fact that you never expected anyone to actually animate this stuff on the manga by hand. Suppose there should be a pun there, given the hands and the fingers. Just want you to know, since I remember you aren't too keen on CG in an early episode, and hopefully be better prepared for that. Thank you for your comment, and I have to say that thank you for your insights once again. I'll be interested to see how they explain the fact that they've actually got the UA building up there and why they've done that, but we'll soon see that in a future episode, and the clarifications for Tomura being technically quirkless, though he's still technically using a quirk, even though it's not a quirk, it's a physical thing. Because all of this seems a little bit up in the air, so what all this actually is right now, it seems. But anyway, thank you for your comment, thank you for your comments, and be sure to comment if you have anything to say about this particular episode. Let me know in the comment section down below. Yes, I said the word comment quite a lot, but anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!